Thank you very much, Len, and thank you to the IIC for the invitation to be here with you today. My name's Robin Foster, and part of the brief we were given was to think about the implications of social networking for traditional policy. And I was very interested to see yesterday a statistic from the UK, which was that Facebook, the social networking site, for the first time overtook all of the BBC's network of websites in September to become the UK's fifth most popular online destination. So Facebook last month had 18.4 million unique users in the UK, which was an increase of 80% year on year. The BBC's site slipped back to 18.2 million unique users, which was a drop of 2.7%. So even where the public broadcasters are competing in the new media world, they do face very tough competition. And that's really the theme, or part of the theme, that I want to talk about this morning, the challenges posed for policy and regulation by the new converged media. I think it's true to say that in the old, more stable world of linear broadcasting and the limited number of channels, the policy objectives were relatively clear. There were really two main objectives, as I see them, to ensure a satisfactory supply of high quality and diverse programming to meet society's needs, and also to secure standards of taste and decency which are acceptable to the public at large. In the old world, the business models of the broadcasters were sufficiently robust to support a high level of regulation. Consumers knew where they stood and what to expect. And I think, although you can argue about the definition of high-quality public service content, last year's report on public service broadcasting here in Hong Kong gave as good account as any, I think, of what it should involve. That report noted it should be characterized by universality, diversity, independence, and distinctiveness. Well, do those same needs apply in a converged world? And if they do, do there exist the tools and the levers, the policies, which can still achieve them in this very different environment? Now, the first thing I want to say is that the converged media, the new media world, does many things much better than traditional media ever could. And here are some of the potential benefits of the converged digital revolution. I think it's true to say that broadband services allow individuals access to a much greater diversity and store of knowledge and information than was perhaps even imaginable a few years ago. And it potentially is a great democratizing force, a major transfer potentially of power away from the state towards citizens, from businesses to consumers, from the establishment media to upstart bloggers. And there was a huge amount of potential for much more democratic action through big campaigns, mobilization of public opinion, and all the activities that go around participation and social networking, much more social interaction, wider creation of content, and even for traditional narrative content, much more convenience, user control, and choice. And in some ways, all of this starts to do what the traditional public service interventions tried to do in the past. So in the view of the UK's Convergence think tank, of which I was a member for the last 12 months, actually the first and most important real policy challenge is not to worry about public service broadcasting, and it's not to worry about content standards, but it's to make sure that nobody gets excluded from all the benefits produced and likely to be generated by the new broadband world. The real risk and the real policy challenge is about digital exclusion. Once we've sorted that out, we can start worrying about the other things. And if you think about it for a moment, that's quite a major call for policymakers around the world to make. It means that governments are being asked to take a big leadership role in encouraging the rollout and take-up of high-speed broadband, while recognizing at the same time that their very success in doing that will create a world in which they're much less able to regulate and control services and content which their citizens have access to. Now, setting that on one side, what in this new converged world should policymakers be thinking about? And in particular, how should they think about those two original objectives of content and content standards? Well, taking first the idea of public service content. Notwithstanding the positive developments that I talked about with broadband, I think there are some good reasons why we should still be thinking about supporting public service content in this new converged world. And I've deliberately not called it public service broadcasting, because I think broadcasting is probably the last thing that it will emerge as. And this slide just has a few examples of the reasons why public service content, in my view, will still be needed in this more converged media world. We may still see the need to publicly fund high quality and impartial news and current affairs, for example. Because although the new media is good at disseminating information and opinion, it might be less good at stimulating and promoting investment in high quality news gathering resources or in investigative journalism. It doesn't always provide a ready means of sifting truth from fiction, and it sometimes encourages people to share their own prejudices rather than seek an impartial and independent view. So an independent and impartial source of news in this converged world could provide a sort of oasis of trust in a very complex environment. Likewise, as Len was saying, I think we still will see an imperative to secure that there is enough high-quality, locally made drama, entertainment and factual programming around. If you take a positive view of the new converged world, you could see a world in which there were many more sources of revenues, that there were new markets and new business models, a high level of consumer demand and a willingness of consumers to pay for lots of good stuff. But a more negative view would see a much more fragmented consumption with more fragmented funding, traditional revenue sources drying up, and consumers less willing to pay. I don't think we know what the outcome is going to be yet. And although the internet so far has been an excellent source of video clips and user-generated content, it's less obviously yet a medium which will support large, high production value investment in narrative content. And even if that does emerge, there is the risk that the business imperatives mean that investment will cater for international rather than local tastes and preferences. And there are also social inclusion concerns. Although the internet encourages social networking, it's much less clear what its impact is going to be on the national sense of shared values, purposes and experiences. And I think also that there are enduring concerns about universality of provision of this sort of content. It's arguably the right of every individual to have access to a certain level of information and to share in common cultural experiences. That right might still be best secured by having some public content provided universally and free at the point of use for everybody. Now, all of this, I think, in the converged world will become very difficult to regulate for, and it will mean that we have to start looking towards much more direct ways of delivering this sort of content, and I'll talk about that in a moment. What it means is really rather big changes to the way we think about intervention, because even if we define what we want public service content to do, there's the challenge of ensuring that in a multi-channel, multi-choice broadband world that anybody actually watches the stuff. And this means a big impact on the way that public service content should be delivered or needs to be delivered. Here again, quite a long list of things, the challenges which public service intervention faces. It needs to be delivered in very different ways, on demand, multi-platform, by syndication, through YouTube. It needs to be searched, available for search via Google. It's not about just controlled, branded linear channels. It may not be about that at all in future. It may be about very different and more imaginative ways of getting content to the end user. It means about packaging and promoting it more effectively. No longer can broadcasters rely on people stumbling across programs in the middle of a schedule. It's about taking people on a journey to content that they wouldn't otherwise have discovered, reinventing, if you like, the old linear channel and what it did in the past. In some genres, interactivity, participation may actually replace broadcast almost entirely, perhaps in news and educational programming. And public service intervention, I think, will need to take on new roles as well. It won't just be about funding and distributing content. It will be about helping people find and interpret existing content which is already available over the internet from a whole range of interesting and exciting providers. We might be talking about, I guess, an electronic library for the digital and broadband age. And it will need to embrace social media and social networking in different ways. I don't think this necessarily means public service content providers throwing open their doors to unmediated public contributions. You can get that on the internet anyway, but it means finding ways of helping people contribute to the debate in intelligent ways, perhaps through more effective moderation and through, as the BBC is doing in the UK, providing some editorial and production support for individuals who want to create their own films, their own reports to put on the BBC's website. That's what it has to do, but we need to reflect also on how it should be delivered, how it should be funded, what mechanisms and institutions are required. And I haven't really got time to talk about those issues this morning, except to say that from the viewpoint of the Convergence think tank in the UK, it's pretty clear that rather than imposing regulations and quotas, it will become increasingly important to rely on more explicit funding or explicit intervention than in the past. Commercial content providers will just find it very difficult to meet those obligations in this much more competitive world. But on the plus side, though, there is scope, I think, over time for less funding being required for public service content, because the nature of the internet, the nature of broadband distribution means that programming can be distributed more effectively. Broadcasters don't have to make all the filler material to flesh out their 24-hour schedules. They can concentrate investment on programs which are then available on demand. So those are some of the things which public service content should focus on. The second big issue, the other big issue, is about content standards. And I just briefly wanted to touch on that as well this morning. Again, a previously tightly regulated world with broadcast licenses and detailed codes and guidelines. Now, in the new Converged world, there are some real challenges that although there are lots of benefits, citizens may feel exposed, they may feel unprotected and unprepared. How do we balance those concerns against the real advantage of free speech and freedom of expression, which broadband services provide us with? And even if we can get a balance, are there effective levers we can use? Well, I think we should look on this as an opportunity, not a problem. The opportunity presented by the converged media world is that we can take a new approach, a very different approach, which gives citizens themselves much more choice and responsibility in determining the nature of the content that they're prepared to access or to, indeed, to allow their families to access. And this is the approach which in the UK, the Byron Review, which has been recently looking at the protection of children from harmful content on the internet, this is the approach that the Byron Review has taken. And Byron proposed a system of largely industry self or co-regulation, encouraging the further development by the industry of the tools and information which enable users themselves to determine what types of content they're prepared to watch or have access to. So the use of mechanisms which many of you will be familiar with, PIN code access to adult content, filtering, more effective labeling of content, and so on. And alongside this, encouraging the industry to step up to the challenge of developing more innovative approaches to managing and packaging content in areas like age verification, moderation of social networking sites, and clear and effective takedown policies. Safe search being another tool in the toolkit. When I've spoken about this, I've previously described this sort of approach as opt-in regulation, where providers are encouraged to join in a recognised kite marking system which guarantees certain levels of protection. Not everyone will join the system, but those who do will provide their users with a safe environment, and that may well be commercially attractive for many providers too. So there are lots of interesting things which can be done in this area without going back to the old sort of tight regulatory approach. But it is true, I think, that governments and regulators have responsibilities too to help make this sort of system work. They need to be clear about their overall expectations rather than just leaving the industry in a vacuum to decide what it wants to do. And they need to be very clear about how they will judge the effectiveness of a system, what sort of metrics they will use. And they can also be very clear about what they will do if a self-regulatory system breaks down. What are the sanctions that they will be able to impose? But we do, as I think somebody said yesterday, get used to the idea of the 80-20 rule, in which we'll think that it's a good result if the main content providers in each country sign up to this sort of system and provide a reasonably clear and safe environment, even if the smaller fry decide not to be part of the club, so to speak. Now, I know I'm running close to the end of my time. The other point I wanted to make is that this approach will really only work as well if we as citizens are able to understand and take advantage of it. And I think one of the things which the Convergence think tank in the UK has been quite clear about is that in the 21st century, digital and media literacy may be as important as reading has been in previous centuries. And this sort of self-regulatory citizens' responsibility approach will only take place if everyone is properly equipped to understand and make the right choices in the marketplace. So, in conclusion, I think that although there are some really big challenges ahead, there are also some quite positive and effective steps which policymakers can take in these very key public interest areas, that those public interest issues don't go away in the new media world, they just take on a very different form. So I guess I would see a positive outcome in which we have universal access to high-quality broadband networks, which helps to provide a lot of the services and a lot of the benefits which public service intervention tried to achieve in the past, that those networks are open with competitive services, that there'll be continued public support for an exciting and innovative public service provision, but which looks very, very different from traditional broadcasting. That the costs of that support will come down over time as advantage is taken of all the benefits of new on-demand distribution systems, and that citizens will have very clear rights and responsibilities and be much better placed than in the past to understand and exercise those rights. And I think all of these steps are interlinked, in fact. If you have high-quality public service content designed for the broadband world, and a broadband environment in which citizens understand and feel safe that in turn will help drive demand and help support the overall objective of high-speed broadband for all. I guess it's a sort of virtuous circle of convergence which policymakers could be aiming for. And on that positive note, I'll finish my session this morning. Thank you very much.